Welcome back, everyone. Today, I'm gonna show you how you can upcycle your old button-ups and sweatshirts. We're gonna be combining these together by taking pieces from the button-up and putting them on the sweater. This is also a super easy project, so if you're new to sewing, you should have no problem following the easy step-by-step tutorial. With all that being said, let's get started. Getting started with supplies, you'll need one button-up and one sweater or crew neck. When it comes to the button-up, I recommend finding one that has a separated button column and also a collar stand. Both of these things are going to make it easier when we start transferring components. But we'll get more into this once we start with the assembly. For the moment, we can place the sweater off to the side and focus on the button-up. The first thing we want to do is remove the collar, and we're going to dethread it at the base of the collar stand. Remember to be very careful because we want this intact. Having that collar stand is going to make it way easier once we install this on the sweater because we're just going to wrap it over the edge and stitch it down. Go ahead and place this off to the side and focus on the button column. As you can see, there's a small overhang on the button column, and we're going to be cutting directly under that overhang, and for the opposite side, we're going to be cutting about a 1/4 inch away from the stitch. Feel free to cut more than a 1/4 inch, you just want to give yourself enough room so you have seam allowance to sew it onto the sweater. And then for the opposite side, we're using that overhang as a clean edge, so you're going to want to cut directly under it. Now that we have both of the button columns cut off, we can place them off to the side. And focusing on the sleeves, I'm going to be cutting mine past the buttons about 2 to 4 inches. This will give me enough space for seam allowance and overall a nice look. Feel free to cut up further or closer to the buttons. After cutting the first one, I like to place it on the second sleeve to get the same exact cut. Go ahead and place them off to the side and move to the pockets. Luckily, this button up has 2 pockets, so I'm going to be utilizing both of these pockets. And if yours only has one, just remove the one. I'm going to be removing the entire pocket assembly and reinstalling that onto the sweater. There's also going to be leftover fabric from the button up, so you can make your own pockets too. These pockets are ready to go, so we can place them off to the side. As far as the rest of the shirt, we're going to be cutting more off in future steps, so for the moment, we can place it off to the side and bring out the sweater. The first thing we want to do is cut directly down the center of the front panel. The best way to do this is measure from the side seams at the bottom and the top, make your mark, and cut directly down the center. We're going to be adding the under button side first. This is a side that doesn't have the overlay, it has the seam allowance on the side. So place the right sides together, lining up the top of the column with the top of the neckline. And depending on the size you're using, it may not line up perfectly with the bottom. So it's best to start stitching from the neckline and going down towards the bottom to see where that button column falls. As you can see, mine falls fairly short. This is because that sweatshirt is stretchy, so it stretches as you sew it, so it's going to be offset just a little bit, but that's okay. It's something I can work with. In future projects, it's best to match up the size of the sweater with the size of the button up. I'm using a large sweater and a medium button up, so the lengths are going to be a little bit off. Next, I'm going to roll that button column upwards onto the seam allowance and add a top stitch. This is going to help flatten that seam and make it look more a part of the sweater. And I do recommend matching your thread color to your fabric color. It's going to hide any imperfections and give it a more professional look. Jumping over to the opposite side of the sweater, it's a raw edge, so the first thing we're going to do is serge that to clean it up. If you don't have a serger, you can use a zigzag stitch. Then we're going to add the second button column directly on top. We're trying to get the buttons to line up, so I'm going to pull the sweater down just a little bit so the bottom edges line up. Once you found that perfect spot, we're going to start by serging the raw edge so that way it doesn't fray over time. If you don't have a serger, you can use a zigzag stitch. Then we're going to line up the button column and sew it down. And most of that button column is hanging off the edge, so that way it can overlap and clip to the other side. Before moving on, it is best to quickly try it on, see if all the buttons line up. If they don't, you can always dethread it and try it again. From here, we're going to open the sweater up and move to the neckline. Grab the collar assembly and place the neckline in between the layers of the collar stand. The neckline I'm using is a little bit smaller than the collar stand, so what I'm going to do is stretch that neckline as I'm sewing it. Take your time and try to make it as neat as possible. Moving right along to the next phase, we're going to be adding the pockets. I'm just going to be placing these in the general location at the top. Feel free to place them anywhere along that front panel or even on the back. Keep in mind, if you are working with the sweater, it's very stretchy, so you may want to stretch it just a little bit before you place your pockets, because once you put this on, depending on the size, it may stretch, so you want to counteract that stretch so it works with the pockets. And I'm sewing as close to the edge as I can. This is the exact stitch path that was on the original button up. It may look like the pockets are kind of scrunched, but once you put this on, they're going to flatten out and it's going to go with the stretch of the sweater. Again, this is dependent on the stretch of your sweater. If you're using a standard fleece crew neck, you don't have to worry about it. But anyways, moving on, we're going to grab the sleeves, place them over the sleeves of the sweater. And the same goes for the sweater sleeve. It may look way smaller than the button up, but it will stretch to the same size. The button up is a stiffer fabric so it doesn't stretch. You're going to want to keep that 2 sides so your arm can fit through it. I'm trying to keep the sleeves the same size, so I'm going to be removing the sweater sleeve at the same size as the button up. And you don't have to throw out the sweater sleeves, it is a finished end, so you can easily turn these into mittens or a hat. It's just something to keep in mind, but for the moment we can place them off to the side and turn the sweater inside out. I find this is the easiest way to install the sleeves because we're going to place the button-up sleeve inside the opening with right sides together, lining up both side seams. Once you have the bottom edges both lined up, you can see how the sweater will stretch around the outside edge and match the same circumference as the button-up. Once both sleeves are ready, we're going to take it to the serger or a zigzag stitch and stitch around the outside edge. Pull the right sides out and double check to make sure all the layers got stitched together. If everything is looking good, the next step, we're going to be adding a top stitch on the button-up side. Just like with the button-up column, this is going to bring both of those layers together, make it stronger and more professional looking. This is a harder stitch to reach, so you may want to take the base off your sewing machine to set it up like a cylinder bed. Adding this top stitch also helps a little bit with the bunchiness of the sweater, because when you're going from a stretch fabric to a stiff fabric, you may get a little bit of bunch effect, but adding this stitch does help. And that's going to complete the first phase of the upcycle project. For the next phase, we're going to be going back to the button up. I added a logo using my embroidery machine. This is optional. You can screen print, embroider, or free stitch a design. But what I'm going to do is cut and remove that logo, then I'm going to move towards the bottom side and cut the bottom edge off. I want to make it look like the button up is on the inside of the sweater, so I'm going to even off the top edge of the bottom edge. And I'll be sewing this to the inside of the sweater so it looks like it's sticking out the bottom. But first I'm going to add the logo on the back, and there's a lot of different ways you can do this. You can roll that edge over to get a clean finish. But since this is a lightweight denim material, I'm just going to stitch it down with the raw edge, so that way once it goes through the wash, the raw edge will begin to fray and just give it an overall nice look. It really comes down to preference in the style you're going for, if you want a clean edge or a raw edge. So give it some thought and do the method that works best with your design. This is another situation where you do want to stretch the back before you sew it, so that way when you put it on, it doesn't all bunch up and it looks flat. But anyways, moving on to the final modification. Grab the bottom edge of the button up, and mine is a lot longer than the width of the sweater, but I'm going to stretch the sweater to match the width of the button up, and I'm going to be lining up the side seams on both sides. Before I sew this to the sweater, I'm going to first take care of the raw edges on both sides by rolling them over twice and stitching them down. And the reason I'm doing this is because I want the edges of the bottom skirt to match the edges of the button column. This is optional. Feel free to leave it as a raw edge if it looks better with your design. I'm going to be placing this just above the waistband on the sweater, so I'm placing the wrong sides together, lining up the outside edges, and then stitching directly on top of the sweater. There's not a really good way to hide this stitch, so I do recommend matching your thread color to your fabric color. In this shot, it's very noticeable, but once you put it on, it kind of hides as the sweater drapes. And for the final step, I added more custom branding. I just used leather strips that I installed with double-sided rivets. And the fun thing about this project is that you don't need to do all these modifications. You can do one or the other. You can just add a pocket, you can just add a sleeve, the bottom, the collar. And it's a great way to take old button-ups and sweaters and give them a new life. So have some fun with it, get creative, and see what you can come up with. And there you have it, your new upcycled sweater button-up is complete. I would love to see how your creations turned out, so tag me on Instagram at Properfit Clothing, and until then, I'm gonna keep the videos coming at you, so I'll see you next time.